welcome back to another video! Today I wanted to talk about the iPad Pro as an artist. So taking a couple steps back, it's come to my attention that I actually have a lot to say about using the iPad Pro as a drawing tool, and I just kind of wanted to make a video talking about it. So there's already a video on my channel that I posted in December of 2018 talking about all of my first impressions and initial challenges and overview of my interactions with the iPad Pro after owning one for 4 months. So I'll link that video in the description in case you want to go down memory lane and see what little baby Candy thought about the iPad Pro, but I was kind of thinking about this video as a follow-up. The iPad and the pencil are still the same as the ones that I was talking about during that video. I haven't really changed them, upgraded or gotten a new one. I think it's the same exact one. It's a 10.5 inch Generation 1 iPad Pro with the Generation 1 Apple Pencil, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So I've kind of come up with a couple different sections for this video. I'm going to start off with talking about why I decided to get an iPad and get into maybe a little bit more of an honest perspective of what I initially thought of the iPad compared to my 2018 video. Then I'll go into what's changed since then in terms of my thoughts, my impressions, what I like, what I don't like about it, and then my final thoughts on whether I would recommend this tool for another artist or not. So while I'm talking about this, I'm going to be working on some fan art from Luca of Miraculous Ladybug while working on the iPad herself. So all of this that you're seeing on the screen is drawn on my iPad Pro. So let's just jump in, right, shall we? Why did I choose to get an iPad Pro? So taking a couple steps back, I have been a digital artist since 2010, 2011, and I started off with a Wacom Intuos small pen tablet. I realized that I wasn't quite interested in upgrading to a medium Intuos pen tablet, and I quite like my even to this day my Wacom still works fine. So it's not that it's broken and I need a new one, it's not that I need to upgrade in size. So the only other kind of upgradey type step, not that anybody ever needs to upgrade or anything like that, but the only upgradey type step that would come after that would be looking into screen tablets. But I was somewhat on the fence about it. But at the point where I was considering actually getting the iPad, it had been released for about a year and it was getting a lot of good reviews from artists. Furthermore, that summer I'd been working a decently paying job while still living with my parents, so I got to save a lot of money. So if there was a time to buy an expensive art tool, that would have been it. And then finally, what tipped me over the edge for choosing to get the iPad Pro was that this artist that's here on YouTube called Burrow CG, previously known as Burrow Dante, he got an iPad Pro and he really liked it. So I figured that if he could acclimatize himself to it as an artist who had been using Photoshop and computers that connect to your desktop for longer than I had, then I figured my chances were pretty good that I would as well. I've also been using iPads just for general tablet-y, not drawing tablet-y, but browsy tablet-y and mobile game type things since 2012. So it wasn't like I was unfamiliar with iPads or iOS. I'm also just a very, very big chained to the Apple ecosystem as it is with MacBooks and iPhones and iPads and crying. But either way, that wasn't kind of the concern for me since I was already part of the ecosystem. It was more of could I adapt my process for drawing to it? So I got the iPad. What were my initial sort of problems with it? And I might have gone into a little bit of these in that video from 2018. To be honest, I have not rewatched it recently, but I was at that point pretty sure trying to convince myself that I had not made a big mistake with a lot of money. So I might not have been as honest then with them as I am being now, though I'm pretty sure I would have mentioned it. I'm not the kind of person that wouldn't be honest about that. But so the biggest challenge starting out with the iPad Pro for me was the lack of keyboard shortcuts, or if I did hook it, because you can hook up a Bluetooth keyboard to your iPad, I just didn't have a comfortable way of setting that up. It wasn't ergonomically comfortable because the iPad was just kind of difficult to prop up properly. I didn't have any good stands for it. The case that I got did have a way for you to prop it up, but it couldn't withhold the weight of my hand while I was drawing. So it was just very uncomfortable to have the keyboard set up. But as I was drawing, I really missed being able to hit Command D to deselect, hitting B to switch to brush tool, to erase the tool, to eyedropper tool, or Command T to transform. I really missed the keyboard shortcuts that I've been training myself to get into for like at that point it was like 7-8 years, but now it's been like 10 or 11. So it was very, very, very much a struggle with me at the beginning because I did not have those shortcuts. The other big gripe at the beginning, which I was able to solve, and I knew it was coming, this was one of the things that in my research I knew that I was going to have to resolve, but it was the fact that like drawing on glass, so drawing with a plastic tip on glass is not a very pleasant experience. So starting out, because I wanted to be a little bit more budget friendly, I got a matte screen protector. That helped all it a little bit, but eventually for the birthday that I had following that, so 5 months into owning the iPad, my brother got me a paper-like screen protector, so that one has a lot more grip, and that's the one that I still have on the iPad at that time. But the sort of stylus to the screen thing had always been kind of a sensory issue for me, to the point where on my Wacom I have a piece of watercolor paper taped on top of it, because watercolor paper has a lot of texture to it, and then I used to have to replace that relatively frequently because it would get wasted from or used up from how much I would draw on it. But yeah, that was an issue that I knew going into, that for the first initial time period was only slightly mitigated. It wasn't at its ideal form with the matte screen protector. The next big issue that I had with the iPad Pro that was very difficult for me to deal with was that Procreate brushes suck, in my opinion, back then as well. Now they've sort of changed the system a little bit more to mimic Photoshop system slightly, but I still have my gripes with it. But back then it was very, very difficult. I couldn't really get the pressure like registration thing to work how I wanted it to, and they kept just like doing things I didn't expect them to, and I didn't understand why. And now I know that the Procreate engine has like this AI thing that tries to have it mimic more traditional tools, but I had fought to get used to for several years. I have Photoshop, like nothing happens without you asking Photoshop to make it happen. So having things happen without me having asked the thing to do the thing was very kind of off-putting, and it made me feel very off balance, and it was something that I had a lot of trouble with getting started. And it was just, yeah, a hard time. I couldn't really get a good drive in it, and I was just spending more time exploring and trying to find a brush to work than actually drawing, and it really did kind of give me a headache to start with. And then in a similar vein is adapting to the gestures and the minimal layout of Procreate. You have so many powerful tools, basically anything you could ever want, but it's kind of hidden in these like cute little icons and cute little menus, and you kind of end up spending more time googling. And I guess that this is anytime you like pick up a new digital app, right, you spend a lot of time looking stuff up and trying to like figure out what's where and what's what and what does what and all those sorts of things. But I found it very challenging at the beginning because Procreate is so minimal, and it was just a very big adaptation that I couldn't really wrap my head around. It was just creating a relatively difficult experience for me to begin with. And that kind of all like the brushes thing, the posture, the lack of keyboard shortcuts things, and then the layout thing really overall made the experience of drawing with the iPad feel really, really slow. And it was very annoying at that point in time, to say the least. And then another couple things that I had a bit of an issue with at the start was that having to get extra accessories. So I already bought this expensive iPad, but on top of that you have to get the little cover thing so you don't lose the cap on your pencil. You have to get a case for the iPad to protect it, and all these other little things that was slightly frustrating. And then the other little frustrating thing that is still a slight minor headache is file management on the iPad. It's just, I don't know, kind of annoying. That's just basically it. The files aren't it's not as comfortable as on a desktop. Let's go with that. But then, with all that complaining and whinging out of the way, what did I like about the iPad initially? It was portable and convenient. I could draw digitally in class, which is something that, unless I brought my Intuos around, it was very unthinkable. So that was a huge bonus. And then it was really easy to put something down and pick it back up, or like join a conversation and then put it away and put it back, and it was very, very, very nice to do that. I also really, really, really enjoyed the fact that Procreate automatically recorded the progress of your drawing, so you could play it back. To me, that was like the shiniest pretty new toy, that it was doing that automatically. Like, I spent way too much time, way more than I would care to admit, just watching back the playthroughs of my drawings coming to life, because that's just like so sad. I mean, this is why I started making YouTube videos in the first place, because I always found speed paints, whether it's other people's or my own, I find like the process of an artwork coming to life, I find that fascinating. So it was great, beautiful, love it, 10 out of 10. And then the other thing that I really appreciated about adapting to the iPad in, this was something that was a big concern for me before I got it, was that drawing directly on the screen ended up being quite intuitive. I was always quite scared that, I would feel annoyed, or I would feel kind of caged in over the fact that, my palm covers part of what I'm supposed to be seeing of the image, or that I just couldn't really sync up. But then at the end, it's similar to drawing on paper, right? It's just you see it and it happens, and the harder adaptation had been getting used to the pad tablet where you're not drawing directly on what you're doing. But it did kind of feel like a waste that I spent so many years training the hand-eye coordination of the screen and the pad tablet being separate than to go back to the screen tablet. But either way, it wasn't as big as a shift as I was fearing it would be, so it was really nice. The next thing that I really liked about the iPad, even from the beginning, was that the battery life of the little guy was really impressive. I was shockingly impressed about how well the battery life held up, and especially using heavy apps. If my laptop is on Photoshop and I'm doing this big old thing, my laptop, it goes the battery. So it was really impressive that the iPad held up as well as it did with the battery using the heavy apps. And then I don't know if this is a testament to how poorly Photoshop is optimized or how good the iPad apps are, but there's such a good sort of flow to it. I never feel like I have to wait for the iPad to do its thinking. With Photoshop, it's a constant oh wait, just a minute, gotta wait for Photoshop to do its thinking, and then it did the transform, or it did the liquefy, or it did the color change, or whatever. The iPad really doesn't do that, so that to me was just glorious. It felt and again, I don't know if it's just Photoshop's that bad, but the iPad didn't do it nearly as much, and it was great. And then lastly, this is something that I know a lot of Windows users are what? How is this impressing you? But it doesn't, my Mac doesn't, neither of my Macs do, but autosave! The iPad had autosave from the get-go, and that was just amazing, brilliant, 10 out of 10. So, after that very long list of complaining, and that slightly shorter list of this is amazing, what do I think of the iPad now? What's changed? What were my complaints, and how did I kind of fix a lot of those pet peeves that were making it really difficult? So the first, and I feel most important thing for my journey in regards to really falling in love with drawing with the iPad, which, spoiler alert for the conclusion, I fell in love with drawing with the iPad, was I completely 100% ditched Procreate. Now, before you come at me with the pitchforks, let me elaborate. So Procreate, again, has that very sort of streamlined UI, which is great for people starting out. You don't get overwhelmed, you don't get sort of what is this sorcery? And it's great for beginner digital artists because it's just it's really distilled down to your core essentials, what you need. It's really easy to understand. But for somebody like me that's moving from Photoshop, that's moving from almost a decade at the point when I started on the iPad experience making digital art, it just felt I knew that the things that I wanted were there, I just didn't know where they were. And it was just really frustrating at that point. So getting rid of Procreate on that ended up being very helpful. The other thing was, again, like I mentioned with the brushes, they just did not behave how I had been trained to believe that digital brushes behaved. And that, again, was a huge interruption and very distracting for my workflow. And yeah, overall, Procreate's great. I paid for it. I still own it. I think it's amazing, and I'm super pleased that a lot of people are having such a good time with it. It's just not the app for me. So discovering Art Studio Pro and really diving into that app to me made the biggest difference. So starting up, the brushes are a lot more like Photoshop brushes. I actually imported my Photoshop brush sets from there, and then I kind of tweaked them a little bit, but very translatable experience. Great for me. Next up is the layout on Art Studio Pro is slightly more cluttered. You have the top menu, the side menu, the other side menu, and the bottom menu. There are a lot more menus, and you can kind of see them here on the screen. But I like it. And there is that little arrow at the top right thing that you can hide them all, and you can get the very naked display if you really wanted to. But I don't mind them. They don't actually take up that much of my screen estate, and I prefer having them visible because it's just easier for me. I don't have to do as much thinking about what does this symbol mean? What does that mean? How many times? It's just, and it's also very it's almost a carbon copy of what it's like on Photoshop. So again, it was less effort on my part to just adopt it in Art Studio Pro than having to relearn it on Procreate. And then another thing that was actually not something that I was complaining about before, but something that actually helped me, that was a bonus on the iPad, which I miss when I go back to Photoshop now, is in both Art Studio Pro and Procreate, the smudge tool is fantastic. It saves so much time with digital painting. Photoshop, what are you doing? I know that Photoshop has that mix and brush thing, but it's never worked out for me. The smudge tool in both Procreate and Art Studio Pro is amazing. 10 out of 10, completely changed my workflow, makes things go so much better. Next up is the customizable quick select menu in Art Studio Pro was another game changer for me. So it's basically 4-finger tap, and then it brings up this little ring of things, and you'll have seen me bring it up a million times in this screen recording so far, but it brings up these, I feel like there's 6 of them, quick select options, and so that made it so I could put the things that I was constantly craving the keyboard shortcuts for, I could put them in there. And so instead of having a keyboard shortcut, I have to like 4-finger tap and then tap the one, but then it has really made it so I barely miss the keyboard drawing on the iPad. So that removes a huge limitation to my workflow speed, as well as like my flexibility in terms of like where I can draw and how comfortably I can draw and stuff like that. Having that quick select menu to do the things that, you know, I would have to like tab into 3 things of the menu, or I would need that keyboard shortcut for, made it so I could actually, for realsies, fully adopt the iPad for the primary drawing tool. If it weren't for that quick select menu, I probably wouldn't have been able to fully make the switch to the extent that I've had, just because it impacts my workflow so much. So yeah, quick select menu, 10 out of 10. That's not to say that there isn't still some value in connecting the keyboard and getting the full range of shortcuts and stuff like that, and I have done that on a couple of occasions, but yeah, it's not a deal breaker for getting into the zone for a complicated piece anymore. Yeah, with the quick select menu I really don't have to. But since we're talking about connecting the keyboard as well on some occasions, I did buy myself a little laptop stand thing that folds up really nice and stuff, but it's made for laptops so it can hold quite a lot more weight. It's height adjustable on 2 axes, so if I need to connect the keyboard, I can just, you know, set the iPad up on the desk on the stand, and then it's ergonomic. I'm not hunched over. I'm not like unable to like see things, or like know where to put the keyboard versus where to put the iPad and all that kind of thing. So I was able to sort of solve that kind of issue by getting this little extra stand, which is again another purchase, another accessory, but it ends up paying off. And if I'm not using it for the iPad, it's perfectly nice to use for my laptop. But yeah, that kind of helped like me really be able to adopt it. It's in particular the quick select menu, and then not trying to force myself to use Procreate when I knew it wasn't working for me. Those were all elements that really helped me switch over to the iPad almost full time. So let's get into the conclusion of this video. It's going quite a lot longer than I intended it to be, but to conclude, I went from drawing on Photoshop multiple times a week for about 9 years to not having used Photoshop for a full illustration between June of 2020 and February of 2022. That's over a year and a half of not using Photoshop, when I had spent almost a decade using Photoshop almost exclusively. So the next conclusion thing is that Procreate isn't for me, and that's okay. If Procreate works well for you, if you got used to it, if it does what you need it to do, if you don't have the same complaints with it that I do, then amazing. I'm so happy for you. Our Studio Pro is about double the price and I bought both. But the fact that I was able to recognize that Procreate isn't for me and switch to an app that is a lot more suited to my workflow, it still like makes it so I can get, because honestly, our Studio Pro is $20. This iPad cost me over $1,000. So, you know, I want to get my money's worth with this thing. So I'm really happy to have found an app that actually does work for me, and Procreate is sadly not in. When I first got the iPad, I was really scared. I thought that I'd make a big mistake, and it's not just because the iPad Pro Generation 2 came out literally a month after my refund period. It was really that kind of fear of, I just spent a lot of money for something that's not worth it. I was really scared about that, and I was trying not to let that show in my 2018 review of the iPad, because I was trying to be optimistic about it. I was trying to be hopeful that I would find my groove with it, and thankfully I did. Sticking it out and working and trying and not giving up and trying to find the solutions for the problems I was facing paid off, and now I, you know, really swear by the iPad as my primary drawing tool. I still use Photoshop for text setting, some geometric elements. Sometimes you really do just need the Photoshop kind of like ecosystem for things. At work, of course, I use Photoshop more than anything, but the iPad has become my primary drawing tool. So do I recommend it for other artists? For that, I'm going to say it depends. So most iPads now support an Apple Pencil. So if someone you know or someone in your household or you already have an iPad that supports the pencil and you're interested in drawing with it, I think the pencil is 100% worth it. You give it a shot, try Procreate, try out Studio Pro. It's not as much of an investment as getting it specifically for this. Like I got this iPad specifically for drawing. Yeah, if you already have access to an iPad, I would recommend trying it with the pencil, and I believe I said similarly in my previous review. But yeah, so Procreate and Art Studio Pro are both pretty affordable one-time purchase style apps, which makes them a lot more appealing compared to Photoshop's subscription model paying. And the iPad has a lot of other options as well. If those two don't work for you, there's other free apps, there's trials for stuff, and there's a lot of content creators that are reviewing iPad drawing apps that you might be able to explore, to look into, to find something that works for your workflow. And if my experience can teach you something, is that don't give up. Just because, you know, it's not working out for the first time, it's not working out with this app or with that or with this accessory, like, you know, just keep trying to make it work. And I do have faith that eventually you'll find a setup that works for you if you're determined. So I think that this is a great tool for someone first transitioning into digital art, as well as someone looking to be able to draw digitally more casually. I don't expect it to be a primary tool for people making art as a primary source of income, whether as a job, like you're part of a studio or something like that, or as, you know, a freelancer artist sort of thing. I do believe that, you know, there is limitations to the iPad that, you know, you would be able to circumvent with, say, a screen tablet, like a Cintiq or a Huion, something, and a BV desktop setup. But for hobbyists and casual freelancers, the iPad Pro is great. I can finally say with complete honesty that I do not regret this purchase. It's only taken me 3 years to get here, guys, but I got here. So to close out this very long-winded review, I wanted to leave off with some questions as usual. So what are your primary drawing tools? What kinds of considerations are you making in terms of either upgrading or diversifying that? And in general, do you ever get the feeling of, oh no, I made a mistake when you purchase an expensive art tool? I'm very excited to hear your thoughts, and I really hope you enjoyed this review 3 years almost later of owning the iPad Pro. So yeah, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you sometime.